In this video, we're going to show you how to build a DIY coat rack using corbels and dimensional lumber from Osborne. Stay tuned for some tips and tricks, and we'll be right back. For this project, we're using the Lawrence Contemporary Corbel Part 8775 on our website. We chose to go with white oak for the wood species on this project to give it a modern look. For the shelf and backboard of the coat rack, we're going to be using the 48-inch 5/4 lumber from Osborne in white oak. The 5/4 lumber will need to be brought down to its final thickness using a joiner or a planer, so we're going to run it through our benchtop planer to get it down to a 1-inch thick board. If you don't have a joiner or planer in your shop, you can also check out the 4x1 true stock lumber from Osborne, which is a fully S4S board that you can use for your projects. Now that our lumber has been milled down to its final thickness, we can determine the length for our top shelf board using our corbels as an estimate to give us a proper overhang. I chose to go with a 24-inch long top shelf, as this allows me to have 4 coat rack hooks on my backboard. This will depend on your project dimensions as well as the types of coat hooks that you're going to be using, so keep that in mind when creating your project. Now that our top is cut to length, I'll make some marks 1 inch from each edge, which will be the overhang for my corbels. Next, I can place the corbels in their proper location and measure the distance between to get the length for my middle backboard. For my project, I needed to cut the backboard to length at 18 3/8 of an inch. However, this may change depending on the width of corbel that you choose. The 5/4 lumber from Osborne is 6 inches wide, so I knew I wanted to rip this down to make it a little easier to work with for my project. I chose to rip the backboard to width at 4 inches, giving me plenty of room to install my coat hooks on. Now that all of our pieces are cut to their final size, we can go ahead and sand and prep the surface before moving on to the next step. The next step for this project is to attach our top to our corbels. To do this, I'm going to pre-drill using a 2-step bit into the top side of our shelf board. First, I need to mark out the locations of my screws so that I can make sure they land in the middle of my corbels. Next, we can pre-drill with a 2-step bit in the marked locations, which will give us a hole that we can add a plug to later. Before attaching the shelf top, I want to make sure to use the backboard as a spacer to keep the corbels a proper distance apart. Next, I can use a clamp to secure the top to the corbel to keep it from moving around. Before installing a wood screw, I'll pre-drill one last time using a small bit into the corbel to avoid any cracking or splitting. Next, we can create some wood plugs from a scrap piece of white oak using our plug cutting bit with either a drill press or a hand drill. If you're interested in learning more about how to create wood plugs for your project, you can check out the video above. While our wood plugs are drying, we can finish working on our backboard, which will be used to mount our coat hooks. I'll start by creating a line with a square to make sure that each hook is at the same height across. Next, we need to determine the spacing between each hook. For my project dimensions, I found that 5 inches between each hook was the proper spacing, but this may change depending on your project. Once you have your coat hooks in the proper location, use a small drill bit and a hammer to mark out the location for each screw. Next, use a small drill bit depending on the size of screw that you're using, and pre-drill each screw location. The last step for our backboard is to install pocket holes on the back side that will allow us to attach them to our corbels. It's important when you're creating your pocket holes to make sure that it's not going to interfere with the hardware and the keyhole brackets on your corbels. As you can see here, I created some marks on the back side of my backboard and my corbels to keep everything in the proper location. Next, we can finish sand any rough areas on the piece to 150 grit and get ready to apply a wood finish. We're going to be finishing this project with Rubio Monocoat, so we're going to wipe down the entire piece with mineral spirits to remove any dust from the surface. Next, we can mix some Rubio into a cup along with the accelerator and mix thoroughly. Finally, apply a small amount of Rubio to the top surface and mix in with a white Scotch-Brite pad. Once the finish has been applied evenly, buff it out with a clean towel, making sure to remove any excess from the surface. You can repeat this process for the rest of the piece before moving on to installing the hardware. Once your project is fully finished, you can install the coat hooks on the backboard using a screwdriver. Once the hardware is installed, you can attach the assembly to a wall using the keyhole brackets on the back side of the corbels. Thanks for joining me for this episode. If you're interested in learning more about the corbels or the 5/4 lumber used in this project, you can check out the links in the description below. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment, and we'll see you next time in the Builder Studio.